The last 3 days before leaving this world, I decided to get along with Reagan and be the perfect wife he always wanted. I stopped getting jealous of his first love and no longer threw tantrums over his constant overnight absences. On the first day, he sneered, "Well, it's about time you got sensible. If you'd been like this earlier, we'd both be happier." On the second day, his gaze became conflicted, his voice heavy with confusion. "Flora, why aren't you angry?" I smiled faintly. "Isn't this the version of me you wanted?" Before reconnecting with the system, Reagan and I had been in a silent standoff for a week. "Host, you've finally decided to leave, huh?" The system's voice carried a tinge of schadenfreude. I didn't blame it. Back when I successfully captured Reagan's heart and chose to stay, the system had earnestly tried to dissuade me. Based on my years of experience, no one who stays ever ends up happy. But back then, I foolishly believed that the love between Reagan and me was indestructible and dismissed its warnings with confidence. Now, I smiled bitterly. How much time do I have left? As early as 3 days. I nodded, deciding to cherish these 3 days and make peace with Reagan. Once the system left, I took the initiative to call Reagan. It was the first time we'd spoken in days. But the call was rejected multiple times. Mechanically, I redialed until, finally, his voice came through, laced with irritation and impatience. "Flora, can you stop?" I froze for a moment, my already disillusioned heart still stinging from his words. Ignoring his tone, I asked gently, "Will you come home for dinner tonight? I made your favorite chicken wings." After a long silence, he exhaled sharply. "Fine, but only if you apologize to Jade first." A week ago, Reagan had helped his first love, Jade, celebrate her birthday. Jade posted photos on Facebook with the caption, "With you here, I'll never envy anyone else." In the photos, Jade had whipped cream on her face and clasped her hands together in a wish, surrounded by luxury gift boxes. Reagan stood behind her, bathed in warm candlelight, while she smiled innocently. Their mutual friends enthusiastically commented, praising their chemistry. Jade replied with a shy smiley face. I liked the post and commented, "Jealous of you having my husband by your side." Minutes later, the post was deleted. Reagan called immediately, furious. "Are you crazy, Flora? Today's her birthday, and you just had to ruin it, didn't you?" Jade's soft, teary voice came through the receiver. "Don't blame Flora, it's my fault for showing off that you were with me." Reagan comforted her gently, "This isn't your fault. She's just being petty and taking it out on you." Then, his tone turned icy as he scolded me. "You're overestimating yourself. Nothing is more important than her birthday." Each word cut like a knife. Furious, I clenched my fists and retorted, "Of course. Your first love's birthday is obviously more important than your wedding anniversary with your wife." Reagan's breathing hitched. In a quieter voice, he asked, "Today is our anniversary?" But before I could answer, Jade's sobs came through again. "Flora, it's all my fault. I'll apologize to you in person." Whatever guilt Reagan might have felt evaporated. He comforted Jade tenderly, then turned back to berate me. "It's just an anniversary. We can celebrate it any year. But this is Jade's first birthday since coming back to the country. Can't you be more understanding, Flora?" I told him, word for word, "No, I can't." Then, I hung up. Love and stability can never coexist, but Reagan didn't understand that. The ice cream cake melted, the little figures kissing on top disintegrating, smearing the words commemorating our 7th wedding anniversary. I picked up the cake and threw it in the trash. Later, my phone buzzed with a message from Jade's burner account. "I told you before, Flora, when it comes to choosing, it'll always be me. Believe it now?" Hours earlier, I wouldn't have believed her. Now, it was undeniable. Reagan didn't come home that night. When I woke up the next morning, he was eating breakfast in the dining room. Seeing me, he glanced up coldly and said, "Come to the office with me later and apologize to Jade. She's been feeling guilty and couldn't sleep all night because of your comment." I laughed bitterly. "I won't. What wife apologizes to a mistress?" "Flora, how can you say something so nasty?" He slammed the table hard. "Jade is just my secretary. She's lost everything, don't you have any sympathy?" I smirked at him. "Your secretary? The one you've been sleeping with?" Reagan's face darkened. He overturned the table, the dishes clattering onto the tiles. I closed my eyes and turned away, unwilling to look at him. Disappointment piled layer upon layer in my heart. How had Reagan become like this? Reagan growled angrily, "Since you're so stubborn, let's take a break for a while." He slammed the door and left. He didn't come back for a whole week. I was so heartbroken that I couldn't sleep through the nights. But during that time, Jade's alternate social media account kept updating nonstop. On a business trip to Bali with my boss, so happy. Accidentally fell on the beach and got my knee scratched by a little rock. The boss scolded me for 10 minutes because he was worried, but he ended up getting me a little cake as punishment, hee hee. Here's a perk, muscle pics. Snapped secretly. If my boss finds out, will he be mad? I didn't cry or make a fuss anymore. Silently, I saved these screenshots. A rotten relationship needs to be discarded in time. This morning, Jade's update said they'd returned from Bali. Reagan's voice continued over the phone. "Flora, did you hear what I said?" Snapping out of my thoughts, I replied faintly, "Okay." The previously noisy background on his end suddenly quieted down. A few seconds later, Reagan asked again, "What did you say?" I forced a smile and said, I agree to apologize to Jade. For the next 3 days, I'll fulfill all your requests. Then, I'll leave you forever." I followed the location Reagan sent me. The private room was loud and bustling. The moment I appeared at the doorway, someone whistled. "Flora's here." The teasing voices were full of anticipation. Since Jade's return, Reagan and I had been fighting nonstop, minor arguments every 3 days, major ones every 5. Everyone in the circle knew about it. Scanning the room, I found Reagan sitting at the center of the sofa. Our eyes met, his expression unreadable. Jade was snuggled next to him like a little bird seeking shelter. "I heard you're here to apologize to Jade," someone jeered. Reagan's friends were always quick to switch allegiances. When Reagan loved me, they didn't dare joke about me. But now that Jade was back, it was clear where she stood in Reagan's heart. As for me, I now earned their disdain. Taking a couple of steps forward, my eyes swept over the table filled with glasses of alcohol. I picked one up gently and said, "To show my sincerity, I'll down this drink and apologize to Miss Jade. Is that okay?" Reagan tilted his head, watching me with amusement, remaining silent. The others exchanged excited glances, eager to watch the show. "What's going on here?" Jade suddenly stood up, like a startled rabbit, and hurried to snatch the glass from my hand. "You only scolded me a little. It's something I deserved. How could I possibly accept your apology?" Her eyes reddened as she spoke. Reagan's gaze softened with concern as he stood and pulled her back into her seat. "Why can't you accept it? With me here, no one's allowed to bully you." Jade's eyes sparkled as she looked at Reagan with gratitude before turning back to me. "Then just a small glass will do. Once you drink it, all the misunderstandings will be cleared up." She smiled and handed me the glass. "Reagan was just protecting me too much, don't be upset." I looked at Reagan and chuckled softly before taking the glass with indifference. "Of course not." I raised the glass. "Let everyone here bear witness. It was my jealousy and misunderstanding of Reagan and Miss Jade's relationship that caused Miss Jade unhappiness. I'll take this drink as my punishment and apology to her." After speaking, I scanned the room. Everyone froze in disbelief. Someone whispered, "No way, is this really the Flora who's never backed down before?" Even Reagan, at the center of the room, looked momentarily stunned. Ignoring his fleeting surprise, I raised the glass and drank it all. I'm allergic to alcohol. Most people wouldn't know, but Reagan does. As the alcohol coursed through me, my body felt like a piece of driftwood in a river. Someone stepped forward to steady me. "Don't drink anymore." Through the haze, I managed to recognize Tony, one of Reagan's friends. Of everyone in the room, he was the only one who hadn't mocked me. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice small. I wanted to look up and ask Reagan if this apology was enough. Instead, I saw Jade quickly exchange a glance with someone else. Immediately, another voice rang out, "Great drinking skills. But if you really want to show sincerity, 1 glass isn't enough, right?" The person shoved an entire bottle of red wine toward me with ill intentions, glancing back at Reagan. Don't you think so? Reagan's brows furrowed deeply as he silently watched the bottle being pushed toward me. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, Jade's choked voice interrupted. Don't say that. It's already an honor for her to lower herself and apologize to someone like me, whose family is broken. As long as she doesn't humiliate me at work anymore or disrupt the company, I'm fine with anything. Reagan raised an eyebrow, looking at her incredulously. She humiliated you at work? When? Jade hesitated and then stammered. It was my first day as your secretary. Anger flared in Reagan's eyes as he turned to me. I met his gaze directly and admitted, that's right, I did. Before that incident, Jade had already caused countless arguments between Reagan and me. Deep down, I had once thought, maybe this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe he still loves me. But that bottle of wine crushed the last bit of hope I had left. Reagan, I don't want you anymore. I smiled at him. If I drink this bottle of wine, will you forgive me? Will you come home with me? Jade also looked up at him. Reagan's calm eyes revealed no emotion. His voice was indifferent. The person you need to apologize to is Jade, not me. Flora, adults should take responsibility for their actions. I swallowed the bitterness in my throat and nodded woodenly. Okay. But in the next second, the bottle in my hand was snatched away. Reagan, drinking an entire bottle could kill someone. It was Tony. Reagan smirked but ignored him, his gaze fixed on me. Flora, the choice is yours. I won't force you. My heart, already shattered to pieces, somehow didn't feel the pain anymore. I'll drink. Determined, I took the bottle back from Tony. After softly thanking him again, I tilted the bottle to my lips and took large gulps. In a daze, I thought I saw Reagan pushing through the crowd, striding toward me. The bottle was pulled from my hand, and my body felt heavy as I collapsed. Reagan, this wine tastes so bitter. In my dream, I seemed to return to 7 years ago. It was when I first arrived in this world. Back then, Reagan was repressed and cruel. He was an illegitimate child, brought back to his father's family only after his mother passed away. The system explained the plot to me. When Reagan was first brought into the family as a child, he was disliked by the elite heirs and often bullied. One time, when a group of heirs squirted water at him with toy guns, Jade, wearing a little white princess dress, stepped forward to shield him. This became an unforgettable moment of beauty in Reagan's memory. What he didn't know was that Jade's bravery and kindness were just a calculated act to impress the male lead watching from afar. To her, Reagan was merely a tool. By the time I arrived, Reagan had started to make a name for himself in the family. But his personality was violent, his business methods ruthless, and he lacked the approval of his grandfather. As the youngest daughter of a family friend recently returned from abroad, I was matched with him in an arranged marriage. At first, Reagan didn't like me at all. For an entire month, I made no progress in winning him over. Until one day, I represented my father in a negotiation for a landmark building project, and Reagan was also present. During the meal, someone deliberately made things difficult for me, insisting I toast each person at the table. After one glass, I started feeling itchy, red rashes appearing on my skin. When I brought the second glass to my lips, someone grabbed my wrist. It was Reagan. He took the glass from my hand, smiling faintly at the others. Our families are close. I'll drink the rest on her behalf. Amidst the clinking glasses and toasts, he skillfully redirected the conversation away from me. Leaning close, he whispered. I suggest you quietly leave now and take your medicine. I'll cover for you. I was stunned for a moment. When I looked up, his bright eyes had already merged seamlessly into the group's lively discussions. Confident, poised, and elegant. At that moment, I realized I had fallen for him. I started intentionally appearing around him, using my warmth and kindness to soften his sharp edges and bring him closer to his grandfather. I also used my family's connections to help him secure one deal after another, increasing his influence in the family business. Together, we left our footprints across the globe. During a negotiation in Southeast Asia, we were caught in crossfire between local forces and trapped for 3 days and nights. Just as we were about to escape the jungle, we ran into armed bandits. I shielded him, taking a bullet to the chest. In that critical moment, the reinforcements we had arranged finally arrived, rescuing us from the brink of death. On the way to the hospital, Reagan cried for the first time, large teardrops falling onto me. He trembled as he asked why I was so foolish and begged me to hold on. He said, "We haven't had our wedding yet. You haven't become my wife. You can't die." At that moment, I truly thought I was going to die on that foreign land. I raised my hand to touch his face, forcing a smile. "Don't cry, Reagan. I came into this world for you." At the same time, the system notified me, "Congratulations, host. The strategy progress has reached 100%. Mission accomplished." I was fortunate that the bullet missed any vital organs. I survived. After 3 months of recovery, Reagan held a grand wedding that captivated the world, marrying me. In the countless nights after our wedding, he whispered his love for me over and over again. By then, Jade had already married the male lead overseas. I thought our lives would no longer be entangled with anyone else. In my dazed state, I felt someone helping me change clothes. I stubbornly pushed him away. "Don't touch me. I have a husband. My husband is Reagan." The man's hands froze in mid-motion, stopping at the scar on my skin. The wound had long since healed, replaced by new flesh, but it would forever mark that moment in time on my body. He seemed to pause for a long while, before gently coaxing, "Be good. Stop fussing. Let's get you changed and take a bath first." He continued to mutter something, but I couldn't make it out. Annoyed, I covered his mouth. "You're so noisy," I complained. Then, without warning, a wave of sadness hit me, and I started sobbing uncontrollably. "What are you crying about?" he asked. That single question was like pulling a loose thread, unraveling me entirely. I cried even harder. "My husband. He's fallen for someone else. He's been so cruel to me. I don't want him anymore. I want to leave." He seemed stunned by my outburst. After that, I don't remember what happened. I drifted into a deep sleep. When I woke up again, daylight had filled the room. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting soft shadows around the bedroom. A voice rang out in my mind, "Host, you're leaving tomorrow. Do you have any regrets?" The system gently reminded me, "He's just outside." As the voice faded, Reagan appeared at the door, holding a glass of honey water. His voice was slightly hoarse, and his expression looked a little unnatural. "You're awake." Without saying a word, I leaned against his hand and drank the honey water. This kind of intimacy was something we hadn't shared in a long time. Since Jade returned, I had found Reagan filthy and forbade him from touching me. Reagan's dark eyes widened in surprise, before his lips curved into a delighted smile. "You always try to be tough, even when you know you shouldn't." His reprimand was mild, but he quickly seemed to recall that he was the root cause of this situation. He immediately fell silent, guilt flickering in his gaze, as if waiting for me to lash out in return. That had become our typical dynamic lately. But I only offered him a soft smile of apology. "You're right. I won't do that anymore." Reagan lifted his head in astonishment, staring at me. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. I spoke up instead. "Reagan, can you come with me to visit Grandpa today?" He nodded instantly. "Of course. Grandpa's been talking about you a lot lately." We went to the supermarket together, holding hands, and browsed the health supplements aisle. I carefully selected one item after another, occasionally asking for his opinion. After a few rounds of questions, he pinched the bridge of his nose and chuckled helplessly. "Are you trying to empty the whole store?" Embarrassed, I glanced at the growing pile of supplements I had chosen, which had already formed a small mountain. Reagan teased, "Looks like we brought the wrong car today. Should have brought a truck instead of the Bentley to haul your loot." I blushed and playfully punched him. His relaxed laughter fell over me like warm sunlight. "It's good to stock up," I said softly, "so Grandpa won't run out later." "We can always come back to buy more," he replied casually. I smiled but didn't respond, lowering my head to continue shopping. Still, I felt an inexplicable pair of eyes on my back, as though observing me from a distance. I ignored it, refusing to dwell on the feeling. After finalizing my selections, I asked Reagan to call the housekeeper to pick up the supplements. We carried only 2 of the best items ourselves. When we reached the underground parking lot, I suddenly exclaimed, "Oh no, I forgot." Reagan looked alarmed. What's wrong? I immediately opened the car door and stepped out. I forgot to buy knee pads and a back brace. Grandpa's knees and back aren't doing well. Reagan followed me out of the driver's seat, wrapping his arm around my waist with a helpless smile. It's still hot out. Does he even need them right now? I shook my head. He'll need them when it gets colder. With that, I ignored his protests and walked back toward the supermarket entrance. Reagan took a big stride to catch up, grabbing my wrist. Flora, why are you in such a hurry? His voice was calm, and his smile gentle, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. We can come back in winter to get them. How about that? Before I could respond, he tugged me firmly back toward the car. Reagan. I sighed internally. Forget it. I didn't want to argue with him, not when tomorrow would be our last day together. As the car merged back onto the main road, silence fell between us. The atmosphere felt awkward. I fidgeted, touching random objects to keep busy. When my fingers brushed against the car charm, Reagan's hand slipped slightly on the wheel, causing the car to jolt. His eyes flicked to where my hand lingered on the fluffy rabbit charm. He quickly explained, Jade was messing around in my car last time and swapped it out. I'll put the original one back when we get home. I paused, stroking the rabbit's soft, white fur. No need to change it back. This one's pretty cute. The light turned red. Reagan stopped the car and turned to look at me, confusion in his eyes. What's wrong? I asked. He frowned slightly. You're not upset? In the past, you'd always get mad if anything of Jade's showed up around me. I smiled faintly. So that's what he was worried about. If I didn't care anymore, why would I get upset? I was wrong before, I said, gazing at the license plate of the car ahead. Jade has a childhood bond with you. Now that she's divorced and her family's fallen apart, I should show her more sympathy and kindness. Competing with her over everything. That wasn't right. I sighed softly. Reagan's frown deepened. But that charm. You made it yourself. Doesn't it bother you? The light turned green, and I reminded him, it's green. Reagan stayed quiet for a few seconds before restarting the car. I turned my head to look out the window at the passing traffic, lost in thought. Did it bother me? I asked myself. My mind wandered back to the day I went to Mount Wutai. By then, Reagan had already solidified his power, though he had no shortage of enemies. Assassination attempts came regularly, leaving me constantly on edge. One night, after waking from a nightmare, I had asked a fortune teller to teach me how to make a lucky charm for him. Now, that charm had disappeared, and I no longer felt the need to ask about it. I had loved sincerely, but only the passionate and genuine Reagan of the past. Not the man he had become, detached, indecisive, and indulgent of Jade's provocations. Flora, he called my name. But before he could say anything more, his phone rang. We both glanced at the screen. It was Jade. I smiled, picking up the phone. You're driving. I'll answer for you. Without waiting for his response, I accepted the video call. Reagan, Jade's soft, delicate voice came through. Reagan swallowed nervously, his gaze shifting toward me. What's wrong, Jade? Reagan, I don't know what to do. I accidentally spilled boiling water on my leg while making tea, Jade whimpered, her voice trembling. It hurts so much, sob, sob. As she spoke, she adjusted the camera, revealing her calf, which was red and swollen. I couldn't help but chuckle softly. She really would go to any lengths to get Reagan's attention, even hurting herself. But honestly, if it was boiling water, wouldn't the burn be worse than just redness? Hearing my laugh, Jade's tone suddenly turned anxious. Flora, are you there too? Did I interrupt your date again? Her voice became low and apologetic. I'm sorry, Reagan. I just didn't know who else to call. You know I don't have any family here. Then, as if resigning herself, she muttered, never mind, I won't bother you anymore. On the screen, Jade pressed her lips tightly together, looking utterly helpless. Don't worry, Reagan instinctively pressed the accelerator, overtaking the car in front. But a moment later, as if remembering something, he softened his tone and said to Jade, I can't come over right now, I have something important to do. I'll call Tony and have him check on you. I stared at him in surprise, my mouth slightly open. The video call ended abruptly. Reagan blinked awkwardly, noticing my reaction. "Why are you looking at me like that?" But before I could answer, a snicker escaped my lips. So he knew how to say no. So he could see through Jade's manipulative act. Then what did all those arguments between us mean? All the excuses he gave me before? Seeing me remain silent, he went ahead and called Tony, asking him to check on Jade. Tony's voice came through the phone, sharp and annoyed. "Any other favor, I'll do it. But not this. Just the sight of that conniving woman makes me sick. You always sympathize with her tragic backstory, but it's not like Flora caused any of it. Let me warn you, if you keep letting her manipulate you like this, one day, you'll regret hurting Flora." Suddenly, a mechanical voice chimed in my head. "Host, this Tony guy is a real ace." Startled, I leaned forward, nearly hitting the dashboard. Reagan, quick to react, stretched out an arm to steady me, preventing the fall. I blinked, momentarily stunned, then muttered, "Thanks." His emotions flickered in his eyes as he reached out to pat my head. "We're married. You don't need to thank me for something like this." I tilted my head to avoid his touch, and his hand paused midair. Realizing my abruptness, I quickly reassured him, "Focus on driving for now." As we neared the Gu family's old mansion, Reagan's phone rang again. It was Jade. A flash of irritation crossed his face as he answered, "What now?" His cold and curt tone seemed to catch Jade off guard. There was a brief silence before she began crying again. "Reagan, I'm in so much pain. How can you just leave me like this?" The mansion was already in sight. Reagan looked conflicted. I smiled at him. "Go check on Jade. She's hurt and needs someone with her." His expression darkened, sadness clouding his gaze as he looked at me. "You need someone with you too." "Reagan." Jade's voice suddenly sharpened. "You promised me when we were kids that you'd always be there for me when I needed you. Did you forget?" Reagan stiffened, glancing at me instinctively. I chuckled lightly and said casually, "It's okay. We're almost at Grandpa's house anyway. I'll just take a cab from here." Reagan hesitated, wanting to say more. But my tone was gentle, yet firm. He eventually agreed to go to Jade, but insisted on dropping me off at the mansion first. As I got out of the car, he looked at me with worry. "Flora, go see Grandpa. I'll be back soon." I smiled at him softly, my gaze serene. I watched the car's shadow grow smaller and disappear in the distance. "Goodbye, Reagan," I whispered. My phone vibrated, alerting me to a new message. It was from Jade. "Flora, you think that old man can keep Reagan by your side? You've already lost." I calmly typed back, "Are you sure about that? Today's outing with Reagan?" I was the one who tipped Jade off about it. The calls she made along the way? I had anticipated them all. This wasn't the first time such a scene had played out, but I didn't mind one more repetition. After I leave this place, I want to deepen Reagan's guilt and regret just a little more. From his reactions earlier, it was clear that he still had feelings for me. Perhaps, if I had said the word, he would have stayed with me instead of running to Jade. But late realizations no longer interest me. I find them disgusting. And I can't help but wonder if, after today, Jade will still feel as confident as she does now. Lost in thought, I suddenly noticed Grandpa walking out of the mansion, leaning on his cane. The sunlight caught his gray hair, making it shimmer. This man, who has shown me the most love and care in this world, had finally come to bid me farewell. Who would have thought that this kind, gentle old man was once a powerful figure feared by both the underworld and the elite? Take a good look at Flora, everyone. Doesn't it seem like she's growing gray hairs too? Grandpa joked, glancing at the butler beside him. I was taken aback. The butler laughed and explained, "The old master is saying you're so young, yet you nag like an old lady." I couldn't help but laugh. Tomorrow, I'll leave this world for good. Maybe that's why I was overly sentimental, giving everyone so many reminders. I didn't expect Grandpa to tease me about it. As night fell, Reagan still hadn't come back. Grandpa, irritated, scolded and ordered the butler to call him over. The system's voice reassured me, "Don't worry, host. I've set his phone so it won't connect." Sure enough, the butler shook his head helplessly after trying to call. Grandpa grew more annoyed. Find out what that brat is doing right now. Seeing him angry, I quickly patted his back to calm him down. He gave me a concerned look and asked, "How long has he been neglecting you like this, girl?" I forced a smile and shook my head. "It's not like that, Grandpa. Reagan's just busy today." "Busy, my foot." Grandpa's anger flared again. The more tolerant I pretended to be now, the harsher the punishment Reagan and Jade would face tomorrow. After all, everyone in the family knew Grandpa liked me far more than Reagan. Once Grandpa was in bed, the system explained, "Host, it's not that he's ignoring you. I made sure his car tires blew out. 3 of them, to be exact. I declined Grandpa's offer to have someone drive me. Reagan will be here soon. Don't worry about me." Then, I slowly walked out of the mansion's estate. As planned, after leaving the property, I would encounter a mugger who would end my life. The moment the snow-white knife plunged into my abdomen, the system severed my consciousness from my body. As the blood poured down the blade, it stained large patches of the asphalt road, turning them dark red. Luckily, I didn't feel any pain. The system took control of my phone and dialed Reagan's number for the last call before I died. He couldn't answer. In the coming nights, he would repeatedly think back, remembering how he had abandoned me on the road for Jade. And how, because he didn't answer my final call for help, he had sealed my fate, when I could have survived. The robbers, realizing they had killed someone, panicked and fled. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated again, but no one would pick it up. My entire body was twisted into an odd position by the robbers. My ribs and knees snapped. To make sure there were no witnesses, they stabbed me a dozen more times. The system, unable to bear it, covered my eyes. Sorry, I might have been a bit too harsh with the arrangement. I shook my head. It's fine. Otherwise, how else could I make Reagan suffer a lifetime of regret? My phone continued to vibrate relentlessly. I gazed at it, lost in thought. The system said, "On the last day in this world, you will exist as a soul." 2 hours later, Reagan tracked my location via my phone and found my body. The sight before him froze him in his tracks. Reagan reached out in disbelief, trembling, to check for my breath. The cold emptiness of my body made him shudder. He collapsed. The system cursed, "You useless scumbag, what's the point of regretting now? Flora. Flora, wake up." Tears streamed down his face as he pressed his hand against my bleeding wound. But there were too many wounds, and the blood had long since dried up. Even though my soul had already left my body, the sight of my mutilated flesh still caused sharp pangs in my heart. Reagan staggered toward the car, holding my body. "Bring the car over," he shouted. The butler, who had been sent by his grandfather to help search for me, immediately drove up. But when he saw me in Reagan's arms, he gasped. "How is she so badly hurt?" I sat with the system in the back seat, watching as Reagan floored the accelerator, running through dozens of red lights. The butler, terrified, kept urging him to slow down and be careful. Reagan yelled at him to shut up. On our way to the hospital, all the specialists from Reagan's family's private hospital were summoned back to work. He placed me on the bed and, with bloodshot eyes, warned everyone, "This is my wife. I don't care what you do, you must save her." The expert team, all of whom were over 40 years old, shook their heads helplessly as they looked at my lifeless body. They solemnly advised Reagan, "Sir, you should find a good mortician, let her go in peace." "What did you say?" Reagan's veins bulged as he grabbed one of the doctors by the collar. His bloodshot eyes looked as if they were going to devour the doctor. People rushed to stop him, but Reagan was like a madman, shouting and screaming. "You didn't even try to save her. Who gave you the right to declare her dead? If she can't survive, I'll make sure you all go down with her." Under the pressure of his power, the experts reluctantly sent me to the ICU and continued their futile attempts to revive me. The system covered its ears. "Host, he's gone mad." I chuckled, but was interrupted by a sudden cry. It was Reagan's grandfather, who had rushed over when he heard the news. His hunched body trembled as he thrust his cane into the ground. "Girl, how could you make me bury my own child?" Tears welled up in my eyes. I apologized softly, "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I broke my promise. I won't be able to see you again." In the next moment, his cane was swung forcefully at Reagan. "It's all your fault," Grandpa shouted, pointing at Reagan. "I just found out that you've been hanging around with that woman. Flora has been so heartbroken, hiding it all from me." He staggered toward Reagan and kicked him to the ground. "Do you deserve her? Don't you remember? She's not just your wife, she's the one who saved your life." Grandpa's words almost took his breath away. The experts present quickly rushed to perform emergency measures on Grandpa. Reagan collapsed on the ground, staring blankly at my body on the bed, tears streaming down his face. "I thought you would never leave me. Flora, I was wrong. I regret it. Please wake up and forgive me." The ICU was silent, only the sound of his heart-wrenching sobs filling the air. From Reagan's perspective, my phone was easily unlocked by Reagan. The password was the date of our wedding. His hand trembled as he turned on the phone, and the first thing he saw was the text message interface. Just one glance, and it was as if he had been struck by lightning, frozen in place, his eyes filled with shock. He slowly swiped through the screen. Jade's provocations and insults from the past few months unfolded before him, one after another. In that moment, Reagan's world seemed to collapse. He watched as the affection and indulgence he had shown Jade turned into countless poisonous snakes and scorpions, biting into his wife. The phone vibrated again. It was a message from my private doctor. "Miss Flora, why haven't you come for a checkup lately?" He swiped up the screen. Soon, he saw my diagnosis of severe depression. Diagnosis: very low mood, no vitality, frequent feelings of helplessness and despair, suicidal thoughts, severe sleep disorders. Reagan looked at the date of the diagnosis, and it seemed familiar to him. Then it clicked, this was the day Jade had started working as his secretary. The doctor asked, "Why do you feel this way?" Flora replied, "My husband's first love came back, and he often leaves me for her, fighting with me. He wasn't like this before." After a few minutes, Flora replied again, "I think he doesn't love me anymore." Reagan closed his eyes slowly. Tears fell relentlessly, soaking his shirt. His mouth opened and closed, but the words he was about to say seemed too difficult, the bitterness spreading in his mouth. After a long pause, the words became clearer. "Flora. Flora, I'm sorry. I do love you. I'm sorry for making you suffer so much." Two streams of tears fell from my eyes. My soul began to fade away. I exchanged a look with the system, and in Reagan's eyes, I confirmed this was the last time I would be in this world. Suddenly, I was surprised to find that Reagan's gaze met mine. "Flora." He reached out frantically, trying to grab me and stop me from leaving. I gave a sad smile. "Reagan, I have no last words for you, and I don't accept your apology." As I spoke, my soul vanished completely in Reagan's broken gaze. When I woke up again, I was lying in a hospital bed. The orphanage director, my mother, was overjoyed, crying, "Flora, you're awake." She rushed to call the doctor before she could even talk to me. That's when I remembered, in the original world, I had died trying to save someone. My soul had entered the Bookworld Administration Bureau. The director told me that everyone who dies saving others gets a chance at rebirth. As long as they complete their mission in the book world, they can be reborn in their original world. In the real world, people would call it a medical miracle. My mission in the book world was to win over the Yandere supporting male character, Reagan. After I recovered and was discharged, I returned to the orphanage to continue as the vice director. I had been thrown into the orphanage after birth, and grew up there, staying to help more children grow. One night, after all the children had gone to bed, I brewed some tea and had my final chat with the system in the yard. "Host, Jade is dead." "Ah?" I was a little surprised. "Why?" "The robbers had already killed someone. I used a little trick to make sure they told Reagan's grandfather Jade's name when they were caught." I nodded in admiration. The system, however, felt that it wasn't thorough enough. "She died more horribly than you. You know that Reagan's grandfather used to be involved with the underworld, and he liked you so much, he took matters into his own hands." He didn't finish the sentence, but made a slicing motion across his neck. I could imagine just how cruel the old man's methods must have been. "And then there's him, after you left, he was nearly beaten to death by grandfather. He gave up on himself, getting drunk every day in front of your grave." It won't be long before alcohol poisoning finishes him off. I clicked my tongue in pity. Such a shame about their family fortune. No one will inherit it. The system smiled slyly. A stack of bank cards appeared in front of me. After he dies, his assets will be transferred to these cards by the Book Transference Bureau. Host, are you ready to become an insanely rich woman? On that quiet summer night, my surprised exclamation rang out. I'm ready. The end.